Sometimes I think the best way to understand where we are is to look back at where we've been. And today we're taking a deep dive into a book that's been grappling with some pretty timeless questions for thousands of years.
Oh,
We're talking about the book of Job.
it's a text that's as relevant today as it was back then, you know?
Oh, absolutely. This is a story that goes way beyond simple explanations and dives right into the core of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
We're going to start by taking a look at Job himself. This is a man who is described as righteous, prosperous, completely dedicated to his faith.
The epitome of a good guy. A man who seemed to have it all: wealth, family, a deep connection to God.
Okay, so he's got it all together, but
Yeah.
then bam,
Right.
life throws a curveball. Or actually more like a whole series of curveballs.
Yeah.
Job loses his wealth, he loses his children, he's even struck with this horrible illness.
He's scraping his boils with pottery shards, sitting in ashes. I mean, it's a devastating picture of suffering.
It's about as low as it gets. But here's the remarkable thing. Even with all this devastation, Job, he refuses to curse God.
He even asks his wife, he says, should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad?
Wow.
It makes you think, right?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. I mean, honestly, how many of us could say that in the face of such suffering?
Exactly.
Job's response, it's a testament to the depth of his faith. This isn't someone who just believes when things are good. This is a man clinging to God in the darkest of times.
It reminds you that real faith, true faith, it's not about blind optimism. It's about holding on to trust, even when everything around you is falling apart.
And this brings us to the real heart of this story. See, Job's suffering, it doesn't go unnoticed. His friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, they come to offer comfort, as friends do. But their attempts to soothe his pain, they kind of take a turn, and it becomes this back and forth, this debate, full of raw emotion.
You know, it's interesting. The friends, they represent a very human tendency, trying to make sense of suffering by finding a reason for it.
Right.
They assume there must be some sin, some hidden wrongdoing, some lack of faith.
They see his suffering as a punishment.
Right.
But Job, he maintains his innocence. He's not looking for easy answers here. He's wrestling with the very nature of a loving God who would allow suffering like this.
It's a conflict that's echoed throughout history, right? And it's one of the reasons why this book is so powerful.
It really is. It makes you think we all face suffering at some point in our life.
Yeah.
But what's the right way to approach it? Do we just look for answers? Do we blame ourselves, blame others?
Right.
Or do we just allow ourselves to sit with the mystery of it all?
Right.
To trust that maybe there's something bigger at play than we can even grasp?
It's a tough question.
So we've got Job's friends, each with their own take on what's going on. Eliphaz, he's the first one to jump in, and he's convinced that Job must have done something to deserve this.
Yeah, Eliphaz is coming from this very strict theological perspective. He believes that God rewards the good and punishes the bad.
Right.
It's all based on this very specific idea of how justice works.
So it's like he's saying, Job, come on, you're a good guy. You must have messed up somehow to be going through all this.
Exactly. It's a simple enough idea, but it doesn't really account for the complexities of life, does it?
Not really, no. Then we have Bildad, who chimes in with his 2 cents. He kind of echoes Eliphaz, saying that Job's suffering, it's a consequence of his own actions. He's all about God's justice and how fleeting worldly success can be.
Bildad, he's a bit more legalistic in his thinking. He's focused on God's laws and the consequences that come with disobedience.
So he's basically saying, Job, if you're suffering, you must have broken the rules somewhere along the line.
Pretty much. And then there's Zophar. He comes in with a similar message, emphasizing God's wisdom, this idea that God's ways are beyond our understanding.
He's basically saying Job should just trust God's plan no matter what.
Right. Get your act together and have some faith. But
Yeah.
the thing is, these are just interpretations of what's happening to Job.
Right.
There's no single right answer here. Each friend is just trying to make sense of it in their own way.
And throughout all of this, Job, he's adamant that he's done nothing to deserve this pain. But there's this interesting tension, because he also acknowledges God's power.
He's wrestling with his faith in the face of all this hardship.
Which is such a human thing to do, right?
Absolutely. He's not just demanding answers, he's grappling with the very core of faith. Why would a loving God allow such suffering?
It's a question that has resonated with people for centuries.
It's what makes the book so powerful.
It really is. And just when you think Job and his friends have reached a stalemate, a new character enters the scene.
This is where the story takes a turn. Elihu, this younger man who's been sitting back observing the whole debate, decides to speak up.
It's like that friend who's been quietly listening to everyone else argue
Yeah.
and then finally decides to throw in their own opinion.
Exactly. And Elihu's perspective, it's fascinating. He actually criticizes both Job and his friends.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He sees Job as being too proud, too focused on his own righteousness. And he criticizes the friends for offering these simple explanations that just don't really address the complexity of what Job is going through.
So Elihu sees things a bit differently.
He does. He argues that God uses suffering as a way to purify us, to teach us.
So he's saying maybe this is God's way of refining Job.
It's an idea that has been debated for a long time. Is suffering some kind of divine test or discipline? Does it help us grow?
Right.
Elihu's perspective is just one interpretation out of many.
But then, as he's laying out his point, the whole conversation takes another dramatic turn. We go from this philosophical debate to a direct encounter with God.
It's like Elihu's pushing them, challenging them to move beyond just talking about God and to actually confront him directly.
To seek a deeper connection.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happens. God, he speaks to Job, and he does it out of a whirlwind.
Talk about an entrance. Talk about an unforgettable moment. There's Job questioning everything, and suddenly God himself shows up. Not exactly a quiet conversation by the fireplace, right?
It's a scene that really drives home the sheer power and mystery of the divine. The whirlwind becomes a symbol of God's presence, overwhelming, awe-inspiring, and impossible to ignore.
You'd think this is where Job finally gets all the answers he's been searching for, right? But instead of offering explanations, God responds with a series of questions that completely change the dynamic.
And these aren't your everyday questions. God challenges Job to contemplate the vastness of creation, the intricate workings of the natural world. It's as if God is saying, were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? Do you comprehend the complexities of the universe I have made?
It's a powerful reminder of just how limited human perspective can be. We tend to view things through the lens of our own experiences, but God operates on a whole other level.
Exactly. God isn't trying to belittle Job, but rather to expand his understanding. It's about helping Job to see beyond his own pain, to grasp the bigger picture of creation and the one who orchestrates it all.
And God really emphasizes this point by describing these awe-inspiring creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. They're these incredibly powerful, almost mythical beings that embody the raw might of nature.
Their descriptions in the text are full of vivid imagery, showcasing their immense size, strength, and untamable nature. They become symbols of God's power, a power that's beyond human comprehension or control.
Can you imagine being Job in that moment, facing the creator of the universe, listening to descriptions of these incredible creatures? It's a humbling experience, to say the least.
It's a turning point for Job. He finally recognizes the limitations of his own understanding and the absolute sovereignty of God. His response is one of humility and surrender.
He says, I am nothing, how could I ever find the answers? It's like he's finally letting go of the need to understand everything, to have all the answers.
And that's a powerful lesson for all of us, isn't it? Sometimes faith isn't about having all the answers, but about trusting in something greater than ourselves, even when we don't understand.
It's about embracing the mystery, accepting that there are things we may never fully comprehend.
And here's the interesting part. Even though Job never gets a direct answer for his suffering, the book doesn't end on a note of despair.
You're right. Instead, we see God's grace and mercy on full display. Job is restored to health, blessed with even greater wealth, and a new family.
It's important to note that this restoration isn't about reward or punishment. It's about God's unwavering faithfulness, his commitment to those who trust in him, even in the midst of suffering.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the book of Job, we're left with a lot to think about. We've encountered suffering, wrestled with faith, and witnessed the awesome power of the divine. But most importantly, we're reminded that even in the face of life's biggest questions, even when answers seem elusive, there's a profound comfort in simply trusting the one who holds all things together.